Alright, in this video we're going to use Dreamweaver to build a contact form. I have our site that we've been using in the class exercise, and I've opened up the contact page. That's what we'll be editing and adding the form to, which kind of makes sense. If you have a contact form, you can certainly have information on your page. And maybe, let's see, if we go ahead and go into the code view here, we could add an H1 tag here. And maybe this will be contact the artist. And then we can have some information on the contact page. In this case, we can have to contact the artist, send an email to, and let's see, I'm just going to make something up here, artist@philo.com, and that doesn't exist, or call 777-777-7777. Alright, both of those are made up numbers, or numbers and email address. And then you could always have another contact information, and we could do Philo. And then one thing that we can do to add a break here, this is called a line break. So we've got Philo and then street address, blah blah blah, and I'm not sure why I put that in. There we go. And then after street address, we can have city, state, and zip code. And it ends with the paragraph. And then we can have one more paragraph, just because we like paragraphs. And then, or complete and submit the online email form below. So email contact forms are pretty common. Generally speaking, it's best to actually not have your email address just sitting here on an HTML page. There are bots that can come along and they pick up these email addresses and add them to their spam email lists. There are ways to use JavaScript to block this. Generally speaking, it's best to not have this. So as you're building websites for clients or your organization, unless you've got a way to block the bots from crawling these, right now this all gets exposed. They're easy to pick up and they get added to spam lists. All right. One of the reasons why I was showing you this is because we can actually add an email link if you really wanted to. And I'll show you the code for doing that. It's pretty simple and not too hard. I'm just trying to make sure I got all the right information here before I go to it. Alright, so if we wanted to write the code, we would do ahref, and we keep the email address in just like it was a text link. Okay, so the email address becomes a text link, but it can also become mail to : and then their email address. So that is the ahref to create an email link. And what will happen is if somebody clicks on that link, it'll open up their email program on their computer. Then we also have a way to add this phone number as a link. So I'm going to do ahref. Don't worry, we're going to get to the email contact form, but I thought I would show you some other things that are pretty handy. Right here in this case, the phone number becomes the text, the anchor text, and as the href we put in tel, colon, and then the phone number without any hyphens in it or any spaces. In this case I've got 10 sevens in a row. Alright? That creates a link for a phone number. Now in a computer that link isn't going to do anything unless they've got some kind of software that dials phone numbers. But on a mobile device, an iPad or an iPhone, Samsung, what you have, if they click on the link, it will actually dial the phone number. So that's pretty handy. I'll save that and let's look at what that looks like. So here's what it looks like. Contact the artist, that was my H1 tag. Here's the link for the email, and here's the link for the phone number. And if somebody clicked that on a mobile device, it would call the number. Here was the address with break, line space breaks. Been a while since we've done those, so it's always good to refresh what the line break is. Having that code at the end of the line instead of paragraphs. If you had paragraphs, then you would get a line space between each one of these. Alright, so we got in our contact page. It's getting designed here a little bit. And next we're going to add the code for our form. So I've already created a paragraph so it shows where this is going to be. And I could hand code all this, but I'm going to let Dreamweaver do it for me. Alright, so what we're going to do is, if you don't have it already, there's an insert window. And you can come up here to Window Insert to get it if you don't already have it. And normally this is by default set to HTML, and you can see all the options that you have here. We're going to change this to form. And now you've got different options for the form. We're going to use a bunch of these. So the first one we have to have is we have to tell the HTML page what all is in the form. You can have multiple forms on a web page, and so it would be important to distinguish which fields get collected and submitted when the form is activated. So here we go. We're going to add a form. That was really hard. We inserted the form. And then sometimes it's, let's see, I'm going to try that again. That was kind of, usually I get, yeah, that is interesting. So I click the form, and I'm going to refresh this properties window down at the bottom. And this is where it's a good idea to name your form. So if we just have the open tags, that by itself isn't going to help us a whole lot as far as being able to distinguish one form from the other. So we're going to go ahead and give this an ID, and I'm just going to call it contact. And then there's a different method that we can use. Let's see here. I'm going to give it a name also. I think I'm going to just go ahead and write this tag in. So we have an ID, we have a name, and I'm going to call that also contact. And those can be used for different things, but it's good to always have an ID and a name, and those can match if you want. And then there's a thing called method. What are you going to do with this form? And we're going to post it. We're going to fill that out just a little bit later. Generally speaking, any form is going to need to have a unique ID. Maybe you want to call this, well, you can call the name and the ID anything you want, and both of those can be used for different things. A lot of times this ID becomes pretty important, and the name becomes important if we're trying to feed information to a database. That's going to be a little bit more involved stuff, but not too bad. But you would have to know what kind of database. For us, we're just doing a simple email form. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to enter some fields. Now I like to create all of these as a paragraph for each one of these forms, and this gives it sort of a container in between each one. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and enter, let's do a text field. So I click on text, and it gives me an input name, but it didn't give me a label. Would have liked a label there. So if I refresh, you can see I have a text form here, and I can give that label a name. And we're going to go ahead. Well, I'm gonna hand code this, just this first one, so that you get an idea of what these need to look like. So we have an input type, and this one happens to be called text. I'm going to go ahead, in the properties I could also give it a name. So down here in this window I can give it a name, so it adds that attribute to it, and it also will give the ID the same name. It's a good idea for these input things to give it a descriptive name as opposed to text field 1. That can get hard to manage and remember after a while. Next thing here, I'm going to create a line space, and I'm going to go ahead and add a label to this is going to be 4 equals name, and we'll put name with a colon, and then that finishes the label. Now I have a few more things I'm going to put in here. Let's go ahead and refresh this. So I've got a label, and I've been hand coding this so far. You can see that I could add a label here as well. So I'm going to be doing that next time. And what we have here is we have the input for name and a label for name. And then let's go ahead and make this one required. So we're going to add required as a class, as an attribute. Let's see here. We're going to add a class later. Let's go ahead and add a max length. So right now I'm going to set that to 100. Can't imagine anybody needing more than 100 characters for a name. Alright, so that becomes our first label. Now this is going to be kind of ugly when you first look at it, but there it is, name, and it's got a field next to it. Alright, so let's now try to use design view. And this gets kind of tricky because it doesn't always put it in the right place. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have another paragraph. And let's see, the next one I'm going to want is an email address. So we can add a label this time. And refresh properties. So I've got a label, and after my label, let's do another text box. There's a difference between text area and text box. I'll show you what that looks like. Now in this one I'm going to click email, because that means it's going to look for an email as the type. And that can certainly help with making sure that they're actually putting an email into your form. We'll name this one email, so it puts in the name and the email for it. Okay, and then let's give that one a max length as well of 100. And do we want to make this one required? This is usually almost always required, that we have the email required. And then the label, this one's going to be for, let me go back to this one and hit the refresh. So once I have the email set here, I can go back to my label and choose email. And it puts in that attribute or that tag. I still need to actually put the label in there. And so that one's going to be called email. Sometimes on these, people will add a little asterisk. And then that way it looks more like it's a required information. And you could even have a disclaimer up here. Please fill out the email before asterisk all fields are required in parentheses. So that way they know they need to fill everything out. Alright, so we've got 2 fields so far. One's a name, one's an email. Not too bad. Next thing we want to do is create a drop list. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead. Let's see if I put my cursor here in design view. Let's see if it adds a paragraph for me. It did. Alright, so that wasn't too bad. Sometimes you just wonder what it's going to do when it does that. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a, what am I looking for? Submit no, image select. So this gives them a drop-down select menu. So I click that and I now have a select field. I always have to refresh this properties window. For this one, let's call it identity. So it gives it the name identity and the name identity. And then we can start putting our option values in it. So I'm going to click this button called List Values and get a little pop-up window where I can start creating these. And the first one I'm going to create, so there's the item label is what they're going to see. The value is what's going to get submitted. So often those can be the same thing, but not necessarily always. So I'm going to do ... a comic artist, and then the value is comic artist. So this is the value that's going to get sent in the email if they select that one. Maybe they're not a comic artist, maybe they're just a comic fan, and we'll call them comic fan. Maybe they're a comic buyer. A comic publisher. And we can even be kind of funny here. A loser. Wait a minute. I am shy and prefer not to say. Just kind of having fun here. We can put loser. Okay, now I'm going to add another one on top of this here. And I didn't add it to the top, but I might also want to put, let's go hyphen, please select. and for the value, did not select. Now with this one selected, I can move that one to the top. And that's a decent list, and you can always come back and edit that and change it. So they're going to see the labels, and it's going to be a drop list, and they get to pick one. And that's when we do the list values. This tends to be what most people do. I mean, people can also do a radio button, which only gives you one option. Checkboxes give people more than one option, or just yes or no kind of option. So let's go ahead and add that, and you can see all the text that put in. I like to create a little bit of a differentiator there between my paragraph. Alright, so this is looking good. And I might go ahead and put these indented just a little bit. Just for the HTML code. Now here I got a space for the select. I don't need that. But it was, these were all the options under select. So if you want to just have better visual organization, the indenting helps you see all of your form fields a little bit easier. If this starts running all together, it gets hard to figure out, okay, what did I do here and how do I change anything? Alright, so this is looking good, but we need a label for this. So I'm going to create a line space here and insert a label. And this one, this particular label will be for the identity. And all I'm going to do here is have IM : Go ahead and save that. And you can see here's the label, and here is the form. Now one thing that happened here is that I can go ahead in this properties window, I can actually choose which one is selected first. So there's this little window that says selected, and if I click on the very first list item, that's going to be what shows up on that list item by default. So until they click on it, they're not going to be able to change it. Alright, so if I come here to design view, or live view, you can see that it's set to please select, and I can now choose from the other options. Alright. Okay, so this is coming along, a little more work to do. Let's go back to split view, and that's what our form is looking like. What else do we need? We need a text area. I'm going to go ahead and add another paragraph for this one. Refresh the scene, and we come over here to our insert, make sure we're still on form, and we have text area. And we have all the different properties for the text area. We're going to name this one message. And we can choose how tall our text area will be. So instead of just a single line, we get multiple lines. Let's go ahead and make this 8 rows. I can give it a max length of 1,000 characters. So once they reach 1,000 characters, they're not going to be able to put any more information into that. And I think that one looks good. Above the text area, we're going to come and add a label again. So I know this seems a little backwards that I have to add the label and then the text area, but that's how it works. And then with the cursor on the label, I can refresh this property window, and then I can choose for. I could always type for equals in the code area, but I can let Dreamweaver do it for me as well. Just have to make sure in between the open and close label that you actually put the label in. And this one will be message. Alright, so this is what it's looking like. We're going to stylize this in a little bit, of course. We're just learning the HTML to build it for now. Alright, things are looking good. The message probably required. I mean, I don't know why somebody would just, here's my name and email. So we can go ahead and check the required box, and it adds the required tag in there as well. Alright, looking good. We're going to do one more, we're going to do another checkbox this time. Not another, but a checkbox, another form field called a checkbox. And we have checkbox right here. Click that. So we have an input type of checkbox. And for this name, we're going to call it Antispam. Now for these names and IDs, generally speaking, they need to all be one word, but you can use hyphens, you can use underscores, you can use lowercase, uppercase, but generally not spaces. When we're dealing with databases, databases could have issues with field names that have spaces or strange characters. So be careful what you name these things in case you need to integrate this with a database. Alright, so we've called this anti-spam. And on this one gets a little, let's see, this one does need to be required, but it's not checked. So you could have this checked ahead of time. I'm going to leave it unchecked because I'm going to show you what we're doing with this. This is sort of a very simple form of anti-spam. And on this one, the label actually goes in front of our checkbox. Here's the label. And we'll put this one for anti-spam. And on this one, we put check this box if you are a human. So what we're trying to do here to some degree is stop these spam bots that will autofill forms and submit them. They know how to fill out content and they know how to submit them. What we're hoping is they don't know how to check a checkbox. So these are instructions that someone has to read, and if the box isn't checked, it's not going to submit it because we made the checkbox required. Now some spam bots could very well get smart enough and figure that out, but there are more sophisticated ways to do anti-spam with forms, but this is a very, very simple first level of defense, and certainly makes it better than not having it. So you'll find out that if you have forms on your website, there will be these form bots that come around and auto submit, and it's all kind of ridiculous, really. Okay, so I've got check this box if you are human. That looks good, and there's the checkbox. We got one more thing we got to put in here. And that's our submit button. Almost every form has a submit button. Not automatically, that's why it's not put in there for you. And a lot of times the input for the submit is pretty important. You can have other buttons that do other different things, but the submit is pretty distinct, and usually you only have one per form. So we'll go ahead and name this one Submit. Now on this form action, we're going to actually put Post, and I don't think we're going to actually get this to work. We would have to put a CGI script on our site to do that. So every type of, depending on your web server, you have software that actually lets you run these forms. And that probably isn't something you would be asked to design or to develop as the web designer, but certainly designing the interface could very well be your job. So knowing how to create all of these interactive elements is pretty important, but you aren't going to necessarily be the one who creates the code to run the form. Alright, so we have type, value. I think I have to put a value in here. Value needs to be submit, ID submit, name submit, form action post, value submit. I have that all right. These are going to be the typical things you're going to need for that submit button. And then that's pretty much it. It designs a submit button by itself for right now. Alright, let's go ahead and save that. And that is the HTML for a form. I'm going to create a separate video to follow this one up on how to stylize this form.